came back to Canada and I stayed with my parents last year because they were very nice to let me come home at 38 years old and live in the backyard and take over the kitchen table, which I have to say thank you. If you didn't let me do that, half of these paintings would have been painted. So I've never had a studio. I've always worked on the floor or on the kitchen table, and so these are the new ones. And because I was in Turkey and, you know, I would see something like the birds flying over the mosque and I thought that was just amazing, but a Turkish person would say to me, I don't understand why you think that's interesting. You know, I think that it's great and I like the painting, but I've never noticed that, I would never think to paint that. And so I started to think about all the things that I see in Turkey as culture and how many things, like growing up in Canada, we don't see anything, especially growing up here. I don't know about you, but I was like, no, we don't have any culture here. I want to go to Mexico, right? So I decided when I came back, and because I've been overseas for 10 years, you start to see things in a different way. And you just start to see Canada as being another culture, Canadian culture being just another culture in a whole bunch of different cultures. And we have really great things about Canada. We have really crazy things about Canada. I had one student this summer, I was working in a language school in Vancouver. And just to give you an example, I had a Saudi Arabian student come up to me, a girl, and she said, you've lived in the Emirates before, so you know my culture. I said, yeah. I know some of it. And she said, I have a question about Canadian culture I want to ask you. Sure. She said, why do Canadians love dogs more than children? I was just like, what? You think that idea? And she said, well, because when I go out, you know, with my friends, I see everybody takes their dog to the coffee shop. And if you've been to Kitsilano lately, that's true. There's like 5 dogs tied up outside the coffee shop. She goes, but if you bring your children, everybody gets annoyed. And I was like, no, she's not wrong. So there's certain things like that that we do see, and for me it's been really, really fantastic to be on the other side and be able to see Canadian culture that way. So when I came home, I started looking at Mehrer and realizing that Mehrer has changed a lot since when I grew up. You know, I remember taking the school bus and there were blossoms for 10 kilometers, and now there's, I think, 2 orchards along the Mehrer Road that still blossom. So I started to paint some pictures of mostly Okanagan and Naramata and things that I think are culture. So, for instance, the raft. I know that it seems a little crazy to paint a picture of a bunch of kids jumping off a raft. However, when I was in Oman, my sister and I were there in July, which is really hot, it's 50 degrees. We were basically trying to get from one place to another, and we were walking along the water, and there were a lot of kids in the water swimming, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be great to jump in that water? And as soon as we got up close and I took a look, I thought, yeah, they're all little boys. There's not one little girl out there, because it's not right for little girls to be swimming in public. Maybe in a swimming pool if their parents took them to a hotel, but you just do not have those kind of freedoms. And just thinking about when I was growing up in the Okanagan, like jumping off a raft in the Okanagan Lake is a cultural experience, and we don't think about those things. And so if you really start to look at like the ice wine, I think gathering ice wine is crazy fun. So, you know, I know people who do it for free just for the experience of getting out there and freezing your fingers in the middle of the night picking ice wine. I haven't done it, but maybe I should. And I did one painting for Elephant Island there, and I think that growing up in the Okanagan, if you look at advertising things, you see, you know, the nice wine bottle, and it's sitting next to the roses or whatever it is on the bench, and they look beautiful. But really, if you live here, you know about the processes of these things. You know, we don't just see cherries; we see all of the ladders and the cherry pickers and the trucks and the French Canadians that come to pick it all, right? So we do have that sort of background of all that stuff, and that's actually what makes us who we are. And so all of these little paintings are, oh, of course I did one of the hockey players after the 2010 Olympics, because we wanted to beat the Americans. So I actually did paint that the week after we won, so that was cool. So that's what, and of course Naramata May Queens. I don't know if you've been to Naramata and seen May Day, but we have a May Queen, and I figured, I was actually, I'll tell you the secret, I was really into watching the Tudors at that time, and I wanted to paint queens. I said, wow, they've got some really crazy costume design, I love it. So then I decided to paint the Naramata May Queens, influenced by the Tudors. But these ones all have their heads. So, it looks like you got some travel journals out. So, any questions?
Have you ever thought about cross-pollinating these two styles? So you take something like this and put it into the Canadian culture. After all, French Canadian is no longer the second language in Canada. Cantonese is. So there is, there is that crossover.
Yeah, absolutely. I have thought about it. Yeah, it's been really, actually having this show has been really interesting for me because I haven't shown any of the linos, other than my friends that have come over and wanted to buy this stuff. This is the first time I've actually ever had it out. Yeah, so I was really surprised at how popular this was last night versus the Canadian stuff over here, which, I was really quite surprised because painting is what I've been doing for the last couple of years. But just getting ready for this show, I have been carrying these linos around with me. I took the linos to Shanghai and never did anything with them. So these have been uncut. So the two on the ends and these two I actually finished last month. So it was kind of an interesting process to get back into cutting it. So I am sort
Well,
of...
although they continue, they've got a strong historical rootedness. That stuff is sort of rooted in, it seems to me, more in a short-term culture, whereas this has got years and years.
Yeah. Well, so I'm thinking about doing more linos, but I haven't quite come up with an idea that I feel really strong about yet. But yeah, I have to consider it. But yeah, but last night was great because I was like, really? Wow. That's cool. Okay, any other questions?
Do you have more people commenting and talking about the west side than the east side, or sorry, the east side than the west side?
Well, actually, I think someone was talking with my mom last night and said if you stood in the middle and looked at this wall and looked at that wall, they look like two different artists. So that's kind of interesting for me. So, but yeah, lots of comments about these ones. So,
do you think you are two different artists from there to here?
No, not at all. Because I've always been really curious about materials and things like that. In fact, lately I've been painting. These ones have been painted in ink, and only because ink has it dries permanent. So if you paint over it, it keeps the original shape underneath it. So I'm practicing with ink. I am always, and it's going into art teaching as well. You have to experiment with a lot of different things. So, but no, I think it's just a progression from one to the other.
I always just kind of see your travels, Asia, and over there's to Istanbul, and over here's to Canada, and it just seems like wherever you are, that's what you think,
Yeah. It would be interesting to have a show with my sister. She's not here right now, but she's also a really fantastic visual artist. And she has a much more funky flair, and things are a little bit more, we call it wonky. That's the only word I really can come up with. But mine is really controlled. Like, you look at all these little lines. I remember when we were getting ready for the Istanbul show, she was trying to carve something, and I was like, do you want me to do that? Because it's just painful to watch you. So we're very different. She does the travel journals as well, but with hers, she records. She's much more visual, actually. I think it's my art history background. I'm much more interested in recording everything. So it's visual, but I have way more, like 3 times more writing in my books than my sister has in hers. And just on an off note, when we went to Cambodia, we did these beautiful journals, and we were so excited. And then my sister left hers in the Hong Kong bathroom in the airport and lost it. So if you ever see one of these floating around, let me know. So yeah, yours never got it back. So, okay.
Just one other thing too about your printmaking, like a lot of block prints and things like that are all done with just blocks of color, whereas you're using a lot of collage.
Yeah.
Which is kind of unique, and it's not
I've
the
never
typical
seen-
way to do block printing, right?
No, the first ones are, if you look at, like, these ones are done with paint. Like this collage, and the Anchor ones in the back were done with paint. Those aren't collaged with paper. But I like the feeling of the paper. And I think it gives it a nice textural quality, but also they don't always match up entirely perfectly, which is what I kind of like about these ones. I think they give them a nice little tactile quality that I really like. So, In Turkey, when the girls weave the carpets, they always weave a mistake into the carpet, and they do that on purpose because they say only God is perfect, and we're not perfect, and we shouldn't try to be. And I thought, wow, that's great. So I try to see my own work that way too, whereas I can be very controlled, and my sister is just like, you know, her stuff is fantastic, and she's just a lot more free, I think, than I am. But we sort of balance each other off that way. So, yeah, so hopefully she'll be doing
These
stuff.
books, you know, do you have a blank book and you start the first page and go through, or do you first do the pages and then assemble it later? Or both?
Both. Like if you look at this one, if the page is inside,
This one? Here.
I'll take this one for a second. This one, no. This one we actually traveled with all the paper in a, so you can see that's where that one comes from. All the papers are different colors. And it was specifically so that I could control these colors. So it took a little bit of planning because I had to have all the pages organized in my head, and they were just clipped together in a clipboard. Because with these ones, you have to carry everything that you have, right? So you're really limited on, you can't bring really great things, but you can go home and have them bound. And with these ones, you put extra pages in, and it's Ian Wright from Lonely Planet. I don't know if you know the Discovery show, but we actually met him in Cambodia. So if you watch Discovery, I had a bit of my bum on the Lonely Planet show. So, but yeah, so that's the one nice thing about binding this, but on the other hand, it makes it confusing. So, and the first time possibly this book, yeah, you can see I didn't realize that they were going to cut right into the lettering.
Oh, okay.
So it goes right into there. But other books, the India book, I think you have, that was a book. That's all the pages are the same colors.
Okay.
So some of the things that we bring, we bring pens, gold markers,
Yeah.
pencils, erasers. In the big book that's still in there, I actually did bring paints with me, but paints are finicky because you got to travel the next day, everything's
Well,
wet.
it's dry,
It's-
right.
Yeah, it's a pain. And sometimes I'd come back and I'd work into the books afterwards and just sort of clean some of the things up and make some pages a little more interesting.
Okay.
So yeah. Yeah. Do you consider working as an illustrator? Oh yeah, I would consider it. I have considered it. Especially getting into this stuff here. I've had a lot of people ask me about doing children's books, illustrations, and things like that. So you never know. I'm always looking for things to do. Good. No more questions? Everybody's happy? All right. Well, thank you. And I'm here, so if you want to take a look around and ask me more questions, you can. Okay. 2 o'clock is next show.
Yeah, looking forward to that.